Well, welcome to this version episode of Kardia Conversations, Keeping Kardia. I love the fact that I get to be surrounded by a beautiful group of people helpers and as licensed professional counselors and mental health service providers. And one of those is Adam Naylor. Adam has been a member of the Kardia team since 2017. So 7 years of service where he is offering his expertise to help people heal and grow so they can live with courage, hope, and freedom, which is really the outcome we desire when we support and serve, offer counseling and coaching to various clients in different capacities. Our hope is that healing that takes place as we're attended to in an appropriate way, that stirs a passion in us, gives us more courage to lean into our lives, to operate and participate with the hope we all carry, so that we can be free to express that to the world that needs it. So, Adam, I've loved getting to know you over the years and opportunity to serve alongside of you and watch you grow in your craft. You started as an intern here in 2017 and then have grown your practice. So glad you're here. Thanks for being a part of this mission with us.
Thank you, Shad. I'm really glad to be here.
He's also multi-talented. So if you haven't searched him on Spotify, you'll see some of his other creative work out there musically. So we can come back and talk about some of that.
We should talk about who else has been in the studio.
We should. We've done some time together in the studio. Some serious releases that'll be a cliffhanger. Okay. They'll stick around to hear more about that. But so the big topic of conversation for us today that we wanted to tackle, that is an interest of yours, is this topic of addiction.
Yeah.
So why don't you kick us off with how you got interested in, focused on that particular aspect of the counseling or therapeutic journey?
Okay. Well, actually, you were part of that, if you remember. There was a contracting opportunity with a local clinic, and I went over there, and that turned into a full-time job. And from there, I didn't even know it was a passion, but I have found that addiction and recovery are the fields that I really enjoy focusing on. Addiction, I think, is something that affects a lot more people than we think. And addiction, I don't think, and this is my opinion, I don't think addiction is primarily a behavioral problem or behavioral solution. I think that is a result of doing deeper heart work. I don't know if I should look here or here. So
both.
Hello.
Yeah.
So I'll tell a little of my story of recovery. And I think that in hindsight, I had dealt with addiction a lot of my life. And the time that it really shone through as what it was probably in my mid-20s. So just to be brief, growing up, things were pretty inconsistent, and there was a good bit of chaos and unpredictability, and that was normal for me. So I went into this mode of protector of other people, but minimized my own needs and came to believe I don't need. I'm fine. So anyway.
What age range are you talking?
As far back as I can remember, just early. And so then I get married, and life is very normal. And
meaning not chaotic,
not chaotic, okay. Predictable, stable. And that was scary for me because I think I was so used to there being a problem to focus on when there wasn't one. A few things happened. One, my anxiety surged because there were no problems, but I was searching for one. And I was creating them. And that felt safe because it was something I could focus that type of energy on. But another thing that happened was I had space to actually feel and to start to recognize there's stuff that I had pressed down for a long time. And so I started drinking heavily. And I think part of the drinking was, in my mind, it was a solution in that I'm creating chaos. I'm going to a vice. Therefore, my sense of control was, okay, here's the problem. I'm creating it so I can fix it. But
You think you were conscious of that, or
no?
Yeah.
I had several people who didn't even know each other over time tell me the same thing. And then I think that there's some real validity to that. But then also it made room for all this stuff to come up, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I remember, when I started working here, even I was still in this season of crying all the time. And that was new to me. And that shame, it was like, oh, I'm such a loser. I'm so weak, blah, blah, blah. These are the things I'm telling myself. People aren't going to want to be around me. I'm a liability. So I started going to therapy, and it was really helpful to see that I fit into a box, that I'm not this Lone Ranger that the rules don't apply to. And I also then became aware of a lot of trauma that I didn't think was trauma.
Right.
And so alcohol was a quick fix, and it was an escape from overwhelming shame, guilt, loneliness, fear, hurt.
Even your story, would it just the reality or your truth of, I don't know if you were coming to terms with that at that point of, that's what I actually lived through, or?
Yeah, there was some of that. And then one of the main things I felt was shame that I'm not being grateful, or that I'm somehow veering away from loved ones, or
by telling the truth about it?
Yeah, I was doing something wrong. And I still deal with that. Mm-hmm. And I'm still vague in this kind of a setting because of respect. But yeah, it was a time of a lot of unlearning and relearning things. And my safe place had always been to get off and be by myself. And alcohol was a way for me to do that, even if I was around people, because I'm somewhere else. So it was a safety mechanism, and it was destructive. So it was something for me that I recognized, that like in my own genetic line, we're all pretty prone to substance use, that kind of thing. And it was helpful. It was a time of recognizing a lot of brokenness, and it was a time of wrestling with freedom and humility, that it's okay for me to need, it's okay for me to be limited, to be vulnerable. And I was able to really challenge, and this is still something that I challenge, but it's not a stronghold anymore. But I was able to challenge this long-held belief that if I'm not successful, if I'm not helpful, if I'm not funny, whatever, that people will leave. And so that's been something that I've wrestled with. Even now that I'm sober, we'll go somewhere, and afterwards I'll say to my wife, like, I feel like I'm just such a boring person. And she would tell me honestly, one way or the other,
whether you are boring.
Yeah. But her perspective's different on that. And so now I'm present. And so anyway, like all this to say, I don't feel defined by alcohol. It's not my identity. It's something that I've gone to, and it's something I could go to again. But all that to say, so that's some of my story. And then in the 5 years that I've worked specifically with people in recovery, what I love about this field is they come in to the room, and we have a focused thing to look into, which is substance use. And for the people that want to go deeper than that, they can. And, sometimes it is deep trauma, sometimes it's not. But each person has a story, and each person has a storyline and a filter through which we look at our stories. And I think there's always room for re-examining assumptions and default beliefs and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the field. And I think it applies not just to substance use. I think it's arguable that everybody is an addict in that we all go to things that are not helpful in order to escape.
I mean, that might be helpful. I love you sharing some of your journey and story. I know there's a lot of rocks you could flip over, and a lot of interest, a lot of things I would be interested in learning more about from you. I think, and at this point in the conversation, maybe outlining different types of addiction, whether it's substance or like what are some of the other type of dependencies that might emerge.
Yeah. Well, there's substance that could be. It could be alcohol. It could be tobacco. Anything that we might go to. It could be harder drugs.
Those are some of the more obvious ones, or the ones that probably people think of most often.
Yeah. There's there are things that they're more so considered obsessive compulsive behaviors. So I don't know what the latest is on it, but like sex addiction, some people say it can be an addiction. Some people say it's a compulsion. I don't know. I mean, there's a way that it's destructive no matter what it's called. And I think that there's room to address that and look into that. One that's interesting to me is I think codependency can be an addiction. People pleasing can be an addiction. And I think it can lead to isolation, just like I think any addiction does. So it's ironic, but I think that's what it can do. We present a kind of a scripted character to people, and nobody really knows us. And we're operating from a baseline of, I have to be this way because if I'm not, rejection, abandonment, whatever it might be. Gambling, I suppose you could call that addiction.
Is that process? That would be in the category of like a process addiction, or different?
The gambling thing, probably. I think so. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
I haven't even done any work with that one, but I know it can be addictive.
Right.
So where I tend to focus is people in recovery from opiate addiction. That's the main thing, but then it's also any other substance, benzos, marijuana.
Which that's an interesting topic too.
The marijuana?
Yeah, because so much of the popular conversation is that it's not addictive.
Yeah.
At least from what I've heard.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is interesting because, I mean, you could argue it both ways. You really could. But I think it's about the motivation of what am I going to a thing for. If it's to escape, then I think whether the word addiction is used or not is not important. It's that there's avoidance of some hurt or responsibility. There's room for healing. There's room for more freedom, that kind of thing.
Well, and I like the word too that I've heard used as dependency, which you associated with codependency. But like when I am depending on something as a means of relief from real life, like that becomes a habitual, addictive process or substance that I'm turning to in lieu of. And some of those are more harmful than others, right? So if I'm turning to heroin, but it's always a funny thing when we compare two bad things. Well, at least it's not this bad thing. It's like, is that really the approach we want to take to justify? Is that the approach I want to take to justify which harmful thing I'm doing? Is this going to kill me faster or slower?
Yeah.
It's like, I guess we could trade that way. But anyway, I think that idea of what am I depending on Am I overly dependent on another person? Am I overly dependent on a particular substance or a process or experience or adrenaline? You mentioned, and I relate to this early on, of that, and I don't know if you'd call it this, but an addiction to anxiety. Like, if I don't feel anxious, then I don't feel alive. Like, I need some stimulus of chaos or
I do relate with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I used to tell people, I'm not anxious. I'm not anxious. I'm passionate. It's like, no, you're scared to death. And you don't know what to do when you're not scared to death, because you feel more alive when you're scared. It's like, I don't like the sound of that. Anyway.
Yeah.
So you're painting, which I think is helpful for all of us when we're taking inventory of this, this broad spectrum, because I think it's easy to dismissively say, I'm not an addict.
Oh, yeah.
But it's like to really honestly push further into that and ask maybe another question would be, what am I depending on?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, anyway, keep going.
Well, and something you said too, I think there are more respectable addictions. If
Right.
The word
more socially acceptable.
Yeah.
Right.
Addiction, distraction, whatever it is. And I wonder if a heroin addiction, in a way, is you're better off having that than like addiction to work that gets praised.
Yeah, because it gets praised. One gets a pat on the back and the other one's like,
yeah. Right. And so the underlying motivation of like work addiction, which is probably something with shame or anxiety, gets rewarded rather than
affirmed.
Yeah,
rather than confronted.
Then like, hey, this fentanyl is going to kill you. Mm-hmm. Work addiction might not kill you, but you might stay isolated, and it might kill you.
Well, I mean, heart attacks, and statistically, if we peel back the onion on that, I mean, you certainly have the blood pressure, so I think it kills you. It kills you differently, and most people don't go to that funeral and say, "What did he die from?" They say a heart attack versus "What did he die from?" Overdose.
Yeah.
So, but I think the point's valid if people can hear what you're saying, and I think it's really important. Is in addiction, I think. Correct me if I'm misstating this, but by definition, it's short-term benefit. Like, you get a buzz, you get a high, you get a hit, you get a dopamine. Long-term devastation. Well, I mean, look at in my work with leaders and executives, it's like there are some occupational hazards that people just accept. Well, yeah, it's going to be a strain on the family. Well, yeah, it's going to be a strain on your health. Well, yeah, you're going to work long hours, and we tolerate those things. And yet, the price we pay, familially, emotionally, physically, relationally, is high. So I'm tracking with what you're saying. I think it's valid.
Yeah, I guess you could overdose on work.
You can, but nobody's going to say that.
Yeah.
What did he die of? Work overdose. Yeah. Which I think, I mean, I don't know that I've ever said that out loud, but I think that's really, really fitting.
Yeah. Yeah. So something that's been fun and challenging is I've met with a lot of people, and a lot of them are people that have been intimidating for me because I'm coming in, they're older than me. What do I have to offer? But the humanity of people, that's been one of the biggest things I've learned in this field is people are people, and we all have different strengths and abilities and that kind of thing. But a lot of presentation of toughness is a protective measure in my experience of people. And I know that that's true for me too. And
yeah, when do we get the most aggressive?
Yeah.
When we're the most afraid.
Yeah, for sure.
Typically.
Yeah. So it's such a gift that for work, I get to talk with people in a place that's safe about vulnerable things that I think people want to talk about. And of course they don't want to talk about too. Like, I think the rationale for staying in an addiction, this is not the only thing, but one of the bigger things I think at the emotional, spiritual level is that many of us would rather struggle in secret than be vulnerable with other people. And the irony, I don't know if it's irony, is that there's freedom in the exposure. But as far, if anybody's listening, like whoever's listening,
Millions of people.
millions, that might not mean anything. That might just sound like of course I would say that. But the risk of being known leads to freedom, and the risk of staying unknown keeps you in a scarier place, in my experience and in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I think that's been proven time and time again. Of nothing good happens in isolation.
Yeah.
Because we're such relationally oriented beings. To get, you talked about being in need, which may be something worth coming back to. Of how does need play into this? Because if I'm not getting relationally nourished, then I'm not getting the type of resource nourishment that I was made to have.
Yeah.
By and Chip Dodd would always say, secrets keep us sick. So that's maybe another good barometer or metric of how addicted am I? If that's even what secrets are you keeping?
Yeah.
What are you hiding? And that doesn't mean you need to make it known to the rooftops, but even for somebody to be able to step into a safe place to begin telling the whole truth about what I've been keeping in secret would be a major green sprout or green shoot of new growth. I think, it has been in my experience as well, the freedom that comes from, because I think we don't realize how much energy it takes to keep our secrets either.
Oh yeah.
Like that's a fuel burner.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, when I was thinking about getting sober, I just noticed how deceitful I got. I mean, I had this deal where I would just say like, all right, I'll have one beer today. All right. Well, now it's on my breath. And then I would just sneak off to the kitchen and sneak it. And sometimes I get caught, sometimes I wouldn't. Breaking down trust in my relationship and causing all these problems that I don't want. I don't want these problems. But yeah, just the secrecy of it is, you can't rest in that. And so like, I think one thing that's important to talk about is the fallacy of self-sufficiency, which is different from responsibility. I think that we're called to be responsible, and we are ultimately responsible for our choices. But it's a fallacy to believe that I can do it on my own. It's just, we're not made that way. There are things we have to do on our own. There are journeys we have to walk alone. That's totally. But I'm not even fully myself without other people. I don't remember where this came from, but how do you even know? Maybe it was Tim Keller. How do you even know if you love somebody? Or maybe it was you or somebody here. I don't know.
Tim Keller and I often
I can't remember who it
we
was.
get confused a lot.
Yeah.
He probably stole it from me, but go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll let him have it.
Yeah. But how do you even know if you love somebody if you're not in a relationship? And so the idea that we can do it on our own, I think there's a certain distance we can go alone, in a manner of speaking, but I think that we miss out on a lot more by being isolated. And I'm an introvert, and I'm saying that. I can spend a lot of time by myself. And I mean, I know for a fact I need people in my life. I need the church. I need friends. I need family. I need correction. I need encouragement. I need to be able to offer those things to other people as well. So this idea that we can do it alone, I think, is a noble but false conclusion that will leave people isolated. And then I think if we were to dig deeper into that motivation, why do I believe that? Well, because, whatever it is, like, here are some examples. I believe that I'm supposed to be able to do this on my own. I believe that to be needy means that I'm not respectable. that I'm not trustworthy or reliable. I believe that if I'm needy, people will leave. There could be a million things there, but I don't think it's a simple statement. I think if we look deeper, there's an emotional motivation tied to avoiding help from other people.
What would that be?
Well, I think it tends to be rooted in shame and fear. I really do. Those two stand out to me, regardless of somebody's presentation. And the goal of this is not a gotcha. Like, see, I told you weren't as good as you think you are. It's not like that. It's like you're holding on to something you don't have to hold on to. You are using all this energy when you could get help, like, I forget where this phrase comes from, but go alone, go fast, go together, go far, something like that.
I like that. Sounds like a good Navy SEAL type quote.
Yeah. It was either from the Navy SEALs or from Tim Keller.
Yeah, or me.
Or from you, yeah. So I think that's all I had to say.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think there's no shortage of examples of folks, and actually in my own life, where I felt this need to be independent, this fear of vulnerability, which just means woundable. So like there's so many cool insights here. So people listening, hearing you as a therapist, I think one thing that happens to like therapists and pastors and doctors is they get put on this pedestal as having achieved something superhuman, becoming less human along the way. Part of our model and our approach and what unites us at Kardia is a very human, relatable, relational approach to therapy. And I don't know how that ties back into even your philosophy of treating addiction. But
fully does,
right.
By the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine hearing you talk that the approach to treating, and even, I don't even know if I love that word, but tending to people, caring for people in their addiction is to relate to them on a human level. So I even hope that as people hear you talking as a therapist who's done hours of training, hours of practicum, hours of internship, hours of continuing education and certification, that you haven't lost your humanity. And in fact, your humanity and your connection to your own humanity is what makes you a better, more effective counselor, in my opinion.
That's my opinion too, that trajectory for sure. Yeah, I mean, I even had a friend, and I take this as a compliment, but he was like, man, if you can quit drinking, I can quit drinking.
Right.
It's like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Like, I'm known enough that my friend, first of all, feels safe to say that. And second of all, like, that my need can be a source of encouragement, not a source of shame. Like, oh, he's better than, no, it's not that at all. It's cool. Yeah. This is what I'm working with. And, for sure. And I think that a therapist who is unapproachable needs to do his or her own work. I don't think they're in a place to really offer anything. Because I think, first of all, the main thing that we have to offer is our presence. I can't fix anybody. I can barely fix myself, but I can share my story, and I can be with people, and I can avoid offering a quick fix and let somebody sit where they are. I've had people do that with me. I went in expecting being rescued, and I wasn't, and I was offended, and I was hurt. And then I thought, okay, that was a very loving thing. Because, there's this idea of soft bigotry. Okay, we're not going to say this out loud, but this person or these people, they're not really capable of much, so we're gonna just pat them on the head the whole way. Versus, no, I actually believe you can do it.
I'm not going to rescue you. I believe you're empowered enough. You have enough agency. You have enough voice. You have enough choice to actually do this work. I love that.
And that's a fun balance in a relationship. Nobody's self-sufficient, and you can choose what to do today. And then freedom comes along the way from things like alcohol or whatever, where it's like, okay, this was my go-to, this was my rescuer. And all it's really shown as I've healed is it can't uphold its promise. It's not as good as connection is, or healing from trauma or whatever. Like that's kind of specific to me. But yeah, I guess
that's really good.
Too.
So on your, one thing we talk about, and I've heard you reference, is the addiction cycle. I don't know if it's beneficial to talk through that, because part of what I hope as people are listening, I'm sure people are listening through a multitude of lenses. Some of us are really aware of our addictions that have no problem saying I am, I've got these dependencies. Some of us may be actively recovering and fighting the good fight in terms of choosing better for ourselves, respecting ourselves in that. Others maybe loved ones. So there's probably a bunch of different lenses, but I think it'd be helpful potentially for people to see what's that cycle look like,
for sure.
and how do I identify it?
Yeah. Something you said, I want to address something real quick though. So it's very possible that, listener, that you don't need to come to therapy for addiction recovery. Very possible. I also know there are a lot of people, and maybe it is you, that there's a fear of addressing that. And when you're ready, I'm here. And when you're ready, other people are here. So I think that's important. This is not a swindling thing. It's, if this applies to you, there's a place for you.
Yeah. And our passion for anyone, and it's because I think of our own journeys and stories. I've got my own, what I held on to tightly and lived in denial of. I minimized it. That's some other language that we use of minimizing and medicating and managing, avoiding and denying. So, and I'll ask people often the question, if there was one thing you could stop doing that is not good for you, you don't even have to call it addiction, but just the thing that you do that you wish you didn't do that you knew was bad for you. Let's just start there.
Yeah.
And then there's help for that.
Yeah.
So good word.
And then why stop that? Whatever that motivation is, there's your fuel for movement. The American, let me say this right. The American Society of Addiction Medicine has a model of the addiction cycle that is very simple, and that's why I like it.
Do you need a whiteboard? Kind of wish you had one.
Usually, yeah. So it's 3 phases. One is the binge intoxication phase. This is the reward part of it. This is me getting my fix, whether I'm getting high or I'm escaping or I'm avoiding withdrawal, which is something, if there's time, we could talk about. The next phase is withdrawal. So that's the reward deficit. That's when I'm lacking something. And then very closely tied to it is the third, which is the obsessing preoccupation phase, which is like an executive function deficit. That's when I can't think as clearly. That's when I'm more irritable. That's when I'm probably more prone to isolate. And so then from there, I go back to this thing. So that's the cycle. Whatever details are in there for any individual, those are kind of the 3 phases that we go through. And addiction, now that we're this far, and let me just give a definition of addiction. It is essentially, it's a cyclical, chronic, relapsing disorder that is digressive in nature, which means I need more of the thing over time, which ultimately leads to deeper chaos, deeper destruction. And I go back to this thing compulsively, regardless of the adverse consequences. So here's where I'm going to throw in my Edgar.
I was going to bring it out.
Quote.
I knew you had a quote you were waiting to share.
Okay.
The artist in you.
So Edgar Allan Poe, I'm assuming he said this. I found it online. I've not talked to him. I have absolutely no pleasure in the stimulants in which I sometimes so madly indulge. It has not been in the pursuit of pleasure that I have periled life and reputation and reason. It has been the desperate attempt to escape from torturing memories, from a sense of insupportable loneliness, and a dread of some strange impending doom. So he says he's not going to addiction because it's even pleasurable anymore. Also, he says he's not risking his life and his reputation, and he's not doing this because it makes sense. It's not from reason that he's doing this. And I think that really speaks of, A, our absolute need, and B, it speaks of just kind of the tendency that we have as people to go into something and latch onto it as our hope, because we're going to do that.
Or made for that, yeah.
Yeah, and so a lot of times we go to the thing that's not helpful, and I really think it's important to point out addiction is not rational, and especially depending on the thing you're addicted to, your ability to think, to use your frontal cortex gets diminished and dampened. And so it's really not you anymore. It's a shell of you seeking something that you crave, which turns off your executive function and your ability to reason even more so. And it gets you chasing after a thing that becomes a taskmaster that you become captive to.
Mm-hmm. I also am interested in my own experience of trying to make myself stop doing harmful things that fit into that cycle, my addictions. I had way less success trying to will myself out of it than something more compelling that I was drawn to. And I think there's a relational component of that, of vulnerability, of being known, of coming out of, can you maybe, I don't know how you would articulate that from your own experience as you've cared for people?
Yeah, I wish we did have a whiteboard for this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the things that we do, they might not even change that much from this place of addiction to this place of recovery, sobriety. They might change a lot. But the point is what's motivating what I'm doing. And I can speak for myself, a lot of the successes I've had have been fear-based. Because if I don't do this, then it means this. I'm still basically doing the same things that I was doing now. But it's not so much that I'm running from fear and shame and guilt as much as I desire to run toward more fulfillment of purpose and that kind of thing. And I think my foundation that I'm running on, if it's going to be something that's solid, I think it has to start with honesty and vulnerability, which is where that connection, that safety comes from. That's where...
That's not just with yourself, it's with other trustworthy people.
For sure. It's got to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, what you're saying, I think that is a key of recovery, if not the key.
Mm-hmm. Do you take people through a vision of what they're headed toward, of what they're desiring, what they're valuing, what they're longing to cultivate and create as a part of that, painting that picture, or is it not that specific?
It can be. Mm-hmm. It depends on how clear their vision is. So we'll talk about it and then we'll go off the cuff from there. Because sometimes, depending on where a person is in recovery, they legitimately might not be able to see past next week.
Right, yeah.
But then sometimes it's like, yeah, these are the goals
as
that
you come out of the fog.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And reconnecting to the hope that's in you, which goes back to our, it's excavating the hope that we've carried that's gotten buried beneath all this other rubble and blood, sweat, tears.
Yeah, yeah. And what I think is really cool is addiction, people who struggle with addiction, I think that we have a real benefit to that because there's a built-in community of others that say, me
on the
too.
Journey.
I'm like this too. The big book, the AA book, I was reading that one time and it was saying things I'd never said out loud. It's like, okay, another proof that I'm not a Lone Ranger. This is a way that we are.
Right.
And I think there's a real benefit to it because we come out of it more whole than we were before we were aware of the problem. It's like there's this dormant thing. There's this assumption that, I don't need help. Okay, my life just crashed. I'm having to reassess everything. I can come out the other side with more freedom, more humility that, okay, no, I'm not able to do this alone. And I'm surrounded by people who are also able to be vulnerable, and we're free from that prison of secrecy, of hiding.
Well, an ego. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, gosh, we go on forever. But yeah, we're thinking about this ego that I've been upholding that has tried to deny my weakness. Which again, you could take that to scripturally looking at Paul, saying that he is made strong in my weakness. So the surrender to our humanity, which is weak, it is vulnerable. There's no denying that, and in reality, the weaker I've become, the more powerful I am. So to your point about the community of people who have learned, being in community with people who have learned to admit their susceptibility to addictive behavior. That's all we're saying is like nobody is insusceptible to that reality.
Oh, no.
Like we're all vulnerable to choosing to depend on and seek relief from something outside of relational honesty and openness. And so that's part of the invitation.
Yeah.
And I just admire your approach to caring, because I think another very well-researched aspect of addiction care is compassion and empathy, compassion. And it's a blend of challenge. Like I'm challenging your ability.
Yeah.
You are not as weak as you. I know we're using these words interchangeably.
Yeah.
You're weak, and you're not that weak. You're that victimhood of like I'm defenseless over this thing. It's like, no, that's not true.
Yeah.
So I love your approach to balancing that empathy and compassion and care with appropriate challenge and empowerment. So it's a really important, noble effort. I respect the way you seek your own care and do your own work so that you can show up and offer something to the people you're caring for, which I think is a really important relationship in the therapeutic process.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So before we let you go, do we need to tell them about the studio time and your album?
Sure.
So it is kind of a fun story. It was an honor to me. So you have an album on Spotify.
I do. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
It's called Without the Heartache, and I started writing it 11 years ago now. Recorded 2 songs in Nashville in 2013. Those just were on hold for a long time. Moved here, started grad school, got married, had kids. Back in a season where there's a little more room for music stuff, so recorded an album. I think it took us 18 months. It was really cool though. I think it was a total of 21 people involved, just a huge, really fun project. It was so fun to orchestrate and have everybody involved. And then Shad plays trumpet.
I don't really play trumpet. I have played trumpet.
Well, you played it on this song.
I did. I played a few notes on the song. You kind of let me do that.
And it sounds good. It adds a lot. The song is called Minneapolis.
Probably the most popular song on there.
Maybe. I think I have like 40 monthly listeners at best. So
but dude, you
can really change the numbers.
The beauty of that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the millions of listeners, go check it out. I just think it's pertinent to this conversation because of the courage it takes to create. Because it is an example of what we've been talking about, of putting yourself vulnerably into the light and sharing and contributing what you have creatively, which is going to look different for everybody. It may be an album, it may be art, it may be written, it may be accounting, but there's courage in putting your work out for public critique. And that was a labor of love, which I'm sure was connected to your own story and journey in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I mean, those are personal songs written by you about your life.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, so there's a lot of a lot in there.
Yeah.
So I do pray that all gets honored.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, because it was, and it was really cool to see you in your craft and see a little bit behind the scenes of that.
It was fun having you there. So in closing, are we closing?
Yeah, close this up.
I want to share this last quote. This is something I first heard here probably 7 years ago. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. So the question I think that we can ask ourselves on a daily basis is, which pain do I want? Do I want the pain of isolation or the pain of connection? Do I want the pain of stagnation or of movement? The whole goal of this is, and I think we've said it clearly, but the goal is not to conclude, oh, I'm incapable. I must ask for approval and permission before I make any move. Nothing like that. But we are human, so what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? How do those play into your life? And which pain do you want? I guess I said one question. You could also say, essentially, like, where am I? Where do I want to go? Who's with me? And which pain do I want today?
Because there will be pain.
There will be blood.
Yeah, there will be. I mean, struggle is inevitable. We talk about that. So yeah, there will be. You are choosing one, and that's, man, we talk about fantasy versus a dream. A fantasy is a picture of the future without risk or pain or work. And so there is that possibility or path. You can pursue that, which is a well-worn path. And now we've got volumes and volumes written about it.
Yeah.
Or the less traveled road is facing that struggle head on, and but not going alone. And so, man, really, really well said. So thank you. Thanks for your work. Thanks for your friendship. Thanks for your partnership.
Right back at
Thanks
you.
for listening, and hope that this was an encouragement to you. Feel free to connect with Adam directly through the KardiaCollective.com website, or reach out to Kardia directly, and they can put you in touch with Adam if you want to speak with him or glean more from him and his experience if this met you where you are today. In the meantime, keep Kardia.